I'm Peter Jennings in New York. Just a short while ago, astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German I'm Peter Jennings in New York. Just a short while ago, astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German authorities have said, in essence, that the Berlin Wall doesn't mean anything anymore. It is perhaps the most important announcement made in Central Europe since the end of World War II, certainly since the wall went up in 1961.
We founded the Stimson Center at a time when the world was changing.
Mr. Gorbachev took office and totally revolutionized the way the Soviet Union was run. He pulled the troops out of Eastern Europe, let the former satellite countries free. The Berlin Wall, which divided East and West, fell a few months after we started the Stimson Center. It was the end of the Cold War. A whole new era of relationships were possible. A whole new range of problems presented themselves. And the existing think tanks were not up to the task.
What makes us different is that we get our hands dirty. We are on the road. We do field work in very difficult places. We have folks risking life and limb in war-torn regions. We don't sit in our cubicles. Yeah, we think. We come up with ideas, but we get out there to test them. Stimson was instrumental in building a non-governmental coalition to support the indefinite extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the successful Senate consent to ratification of the Chemical Weapons Convention.
We put together a working group chaired by General Andrew Goodpaster, and the group included people like Secretary McNamara, Paul Nitze, who was a consummate Cold Warrior. And this group, in the late 1990s, put out a report that said we should work to eliminate all nuclear weapons from the face of the earth. And it was the first time that the establishment had come out and said anything like that.
We had this toolbox of mechanisms to prevent a Cold War from becoming hot. And we also did really good work on the UN.
They had just set up their peacekeeping office. They never had one before. And we brought to them from the US military advice about what a command center looks like, what sort of training programs they should establish, how to get their logistics organized, which has changed the way the UN makes decisions on peacekeeping and has toughened the kind of approach they take to it.
And did remarkable work advancing the concept of the responsibility of states to protect their own citizens. So Stimson 30 years ago was created at a time of positive change, and vistas opened up for creative work. And here we are, 3 decades later, at a time of immense change, once again, but it's negative.
And the United States is unsure of its role in the world. The country is split about what role it should have. So it's a time where good thinking, convening people with different perspectives, and finding practical solutions are forte. It's the time for that again.
We have new issues, a wider set of issues than during our time.
Right.
Environmental security, food security. We're all in. Stimson Center has a lot to do.
Yeah. We'll do it over the next 30 years.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Stoll, Senior Vice President of Research Programs here at the Stimson Center. I am truly honored to welcome you all here today as we remember and celebrate a remarkable man, Barry M. Blechman, the greatest friend, father, colleague, co-founder, and advisor that one could hope to know. As co-founder of the Stimson Center, together with Michael Crapon, Barry was fiercely, some might say ferociously, committed to a goal of a safer, more prosperous world for all. And he spent more than half a century in this pursuit, with more than 5 decades of distinguished service in national security in both the public and private sectors. As you will soon see, Barry made the most of every moment. Born in the Bronx in 1943, Blechman later moved to Queens and graduated from Forest Hills High School at age 16 after skipping a grade. He received a bachelor's degree in political science from Queens College in 1963, where he was elected chancellor of Tau Epsilon Phi fraternity. Son of a plumber and a bookkeeper, Barry worked his way through college, including a stint as a Fuller Brush door-to-door salesman. When he quit in 1964 to move to Washington, his manager told him it was a mistake. He was so good at selling, he could one day be the manager of all Fuller Brush sales in the Bronx. But Barry pushed his Fuller Brush aspirations aside, earning a PhD in international relations at Georgetown University. His government career began in 1964 as a management intern at the Pentagon. 2 years later, he moved to the Center for Naval Analyses. In 1971, he joined the Brookings Institution to head its Defense Analysis Project and co-author its annual analysis of the federal budget, setting national priorities. The report scrutinized defense issues, incorporating the same methodologies used by the Pentagon, and was the first time this had been done in publicly available documents. While at Brookings, Barry met former Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter and became one of Carter's defense advisors. After the election, he joined the transition team at the Office of Management and Budget. Eventually, Barry joined the Carter administration as Assistant Director of the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. Returning to the think tank world, Barry used his talents for raising funds for projects at a number of institutions. The secret was simple, and I think it's what we still follow here at Stimson: deliver the promised work on time and within budget. His projects led to the creation of a direct communications channel between the U.S. and Soviet military commands and a blueprint for overhauling the organization of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that eventually was approximated by the 1984 Goldwater-Nichols Act. He also drafted the report of the Palm Commission, a group of international leaders convened by the Prime Minister of Sweden to ease the Cold War. In all such endeavors, Blechman followed former Assistant Secretary of War John J. McCloy's maxim that one could accomplish almost anything in Washington if you were willing to let others take the credit. In the mid-1980s, Barry decided to start his own firm. Founded in 1984, DFI was not born successful. It's worth noting that DFI's first office was a spare room in Barry's DuPont Circle row house. But the grit and determination of Barry eventually grew the company to nearly 200 people, some of which are here today. Serving as the firm's chairman until the company's sale in 2007, Barry's big bet paid off with enormous analytical contributions to the field of national security and defense policy. In 1989, as you just saw, Barry and Michael founded the Stimson Center. Just a few months later, as the world watched as the Berlin Wall fell. In reflecting on the moment, Barry said that a whole new era of relationships were possible. A whole new range of problems presented themselves, and the existing think tanks were not up to the task. And they built Stimson to meet this demand. From its founding in 1989, the Stimson Center was formed and indelibly shaped by the involvement of Barry Blechman. Even as recently as this year, rare were the weeks when Barry couldn't be found in the halls, meeting with staff, sending us emails, or joining one of Stimson's events. In fact, Barry moderated an excellent event here on this stage less than 2 weeks before he passed. He was enormously invested in the success and impact of the organization, and his pragmatic, no-nonsense spirit continues to define the work of the Stimson Center today. On a personal note, I feel incredibly blessed to have worked alongside Barry and benefited from his wise counsel for nearly 15 years. I regularly think to myself, what would Barry do as we navigate very complex policy challenges here at Stimson? Perhaps even more, Barry was invested in the people behind these organizations. In his time at DFI and Stimson, Barry was a mentor to dozens of young defense analysts, many of whom went on to future greatness and who have joined us here at Stimson today to share their reflections with us. One of these individuals who had the pleasure and honor to receive Barry's mentorship for more than 2 decades is Stimson Center President and CEO Brian Finley. Brian, unfortunately, was unable to join us in person today, but he sent a message, which I am glad to pass along to you all. So now you have to imagine me really tall and with a Canadian accent as I read Brian's words. To those of us who knew him, Barry was the kindest, the smartest, and somehow also the most humble guy in any room. But lest you be fooled by his soft-spoken nature, Barry's commitment and his stubborn, undaunted drive to build and promote the practical work of the Stimson Center was in unlimited supply. It is an honor to be that ongoing caretaker of his remarkable legacy. In a word, Barry Blechman was irrepressible. His depth of spirit and professional drive were contagious, and his legacy of impact in the reduction of nuclear dangers lives on today. He was a remarkable man, an inspiration to us all, and a guiding force to me personally in the 20 years that we worked together at Stimson. He will be deeply missed. One of the great honors of sitting in this role as CEO of Stimson is to be on the tight end of the funnel in receiving the outpouring of friendship, love, and gratitude to the many individuals whose careers and lives have been touched by Barry's mentorship. It is humbling to anyone to get a glimpse into the number of people that they have mentored, and for Barry, that list is especially long. In the hour that follows, we have the pleasure to welcome several of these individuals back to Stimson as they share their stories and memories of a man well-loved and a life well-lived. I hope you will enjoy these reflections on Barry Blechman's life and legacy of impact. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker to the stage, Ellen Lapson, President Emeritus of the Stimson Center.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and I really want to tip my hat to Brian as well. I know he would have loved to be here today. It was my great good fortune to get a phone call from Barry Blechman in late 2001. I was serving as the vice chairman of the NIC, the National Intelligence Council, and I was hitting the 5th anniversary of the job, the 25th anniversary of government service, et cetera, and this was like serendipity. The matchmaker was Enid Shuttle, the great pioneer of financial support to security studies institutions around the world. Enid was both on the board of the Stimson Center, and she was at the time my collaborator and a consultant to the Global Trends series at the National Intelligence Council. So Barry asked whether I would be interested in talking to the board about their search for a new president and CEO of the center, and I had always assumed when I left government I would somehow be at a think tank. I didn't think I would be at the top of a think tank, but lo and behold, that's what happened, and it was a remarkable lucky break for me and a wonderful opportunity to learn. Barry was my chair for maybe the first 5 years I was here until Link Bloomfield became the chairman of the Stimson Center, and his kind of quiet leadership and direction, the professionalism with which one had to prepare the board book and think about new board members and think about ways to motivate and inspire staff. It was really a great learning experience and a great collaboration for me. You'll hear about so many of his qualities that all of us, I think, admired collectively. I thought I'd focus in particular on how he moved from his deep, deep expertise in nuclear weapons policy, his deep, abiding commitment to trying to reduce the dangers of nuclear weapons, but how his intellectual curiosity led him to bring that knowledge to other projects. So I just wanted to mention 2 projects that he and I collaborated on that I think kind of showed that integration of knowledge. When you get experts in 2 different areas of expertise to talk to each other, that's sometimes how new knowledge gets created. So here are 2 examples from Barry's experience here. I had known Prince Turki, the former head of Saudi intelligence, the former Saudi ambassador to the U.S. and was currently serving as the, and I believe still is, the Secretary General of the King Faisal Foundation in Riyadh. Turkey and I were he mentioned to me that that Saudi Arabia was just beginning to produce nuclear experts, PhDs in nuclear technology. They were almost exclusively focused on nuclear energy, nuclear economics, and they really were not either permitted by the academic institutions in the country at the time to look at nuclear weapons issues. But Turkey felt that they needed to be exposed to a kind of broader conversation about nuclear issues as an international security problem. And so Barry and I designed this project. We would bring 10 internationals, and the Saudis would bring 10 of their nuclear experts for a quite remarkable workshop in Riyadh for 3 days. Barry had never been to the kingdom, and I have found some pictures on my phone of how kind of titillated he was and thrilled to be in Riyadh at the time. And we had both the gilded dinners in hotels as well as some serious substantive work to do together. Brian Finley, Link Bloomfield, former Stimson board member Jean-Francois Sesnick, Barry and I went off to Riyadh, and it was really quite a great adventure. There was a beautiful moment when Prince Turki looked around the table and he said, we've got a Russian and some Americans, a Frenchman, but we don't have an Iranian, so I will present the Iranian point of view. And it was quite remarkable because the Saudis, I think, felt like they were completely disoriented. He so fairly and objectively presented the Iranian national position on nuclear technology and the importance of nuclear enrichment. But for the American team, I thought this was very enlightened. This was the smart way to do it, and I think Barry thoroughly enjoyed that experience. The second example I wanted to share was, lo and behold, one day I got a call from Ruth Greenspan Bell, a woman that I did not know, Wilson Center scholar on environmental issues, and she said, I was wondering if you could help me find someone who's an expert on nuclear negotiations. I feel like I could learn something about recommending climate talks. Are there lessons to learn from the nuclear negotiation experience? So I went trotting off to Barry and said, what do you think of this? And he said, oh, no, I don't know enough about the climate issues. That's not my comfort zone, whatever. I said, well, let's just talk to her. And they went off to the races. They produced several journal articles. There was a colloquy in the magazine of Science and Technology responding to the ideas that Ruth and Barry had developed about the application of some of the lessons. And in a very Stimson-esque way, here's what they came to. Small measures of progress can be achieved as stepping stones towards bigger ones. So it was that pragmatic steps philosophy that they took from the nuclear experience and applied it to climate change. So I just kind of, two of many, many examples. Barry would always enjoy coming back. I had spent most of my career looking at the Middle East, and he always liked to get my take on whatever was going on in the Middle East. So that kind of intellectual curiosity and that kind of eagerness to learn new things was so much part of my relationship with him. And just to finish, I want to just pay homage to the friendship and professional partnership of Michael Crapon and Barry. The two of them really, created some synergy, they had different styles, they had different substantive interests, but together they so much set the style and the cachet, if you will, of the Stimson Center, the way Stimson looks at problems with both ideal goals and practical steps. We're all of us who are part of the Stimson family, whether we're currently employed or used to be employed by Stimson, I think owe a great debt to both of these guys. And I hope that the spirit of what they have achieved here will live on for some time to come. So as Rachel noted in her remarks, one of the themes of our gathering, I'm sure, will be mentorship, a role he was so proud to play. And so I'm now very happy to pass the baton to one of Barry's favorite proteges, Christine Wormuth, who served as the 25th Secretary of the Army. Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's really a blessing to be here today with everyone to remember Barry. I was shocked, frankly, to learn of his passing. I had been invited here last September to celebrate Stimson Center's 35th anniversary, And frankly, I had no idea that Barry was fighting cancer at the time. So the fact that he was gone just came as a terrible surprise to me, as I'm sure it did to everyone, whether they knew or not. But it's wonderful, I think, to have the opportunity to come together and to celebrate Barry and to remember him and to just share all of the wonderful things that he did. To include, as I look out around the room, I think this gathering is really a manifestation of, physically, a manifestation of the incredible national security community that he was a part of, that he helped build over time, and that he mentored over so many years. Barry was actually my boss not once but twice. I came to Stimson as a research assistant to work actually on the project on eliminating weapons of mass destruction that was mentioned in the video. So that was a big project that Barry was personally very engaged in, even as he and Michael were running the whole center writ large. At the time, I worked mostly for a wonderful senior scholar named Dr. Kathleen Fisher, and she was doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Those of us who have worked in think tanks know how that goes. But absolutely, from time to time, I would get called into Barry's office to take his comments and edits on manuscripts that we were working on, or to walk through plans for a task force meeting. I was chuckling to myself. I'd forgotten, frankly, but watching the video, I remember I got to meet former Secretary of Defense Richard McNamara, who, for all that I knew of him, he was sort of this older guy wearing like a cardigan and sort of big shoes with big soles. And it was just sort of astounding to me to have him come to our offices for these working groups. And when I was thinking about going to see Barry about various things on the project, I thought, later in life, I saw that he described himself as an overachiever and an impatient taskmaster. And I can definitely attest to the truth of that. Anytime I got called in to see him, I was very much intimidated by his intellect. But the fact that I knew he had such high expectations challenged me to try to meet those. And also, he usually leavened his feedback with humor, in my experience. When I worked at Stimson, we were actually a couple of blocks down the street in a building that looked right over DuPont Circle. And at that time, we shared office space with DFI, which was DFI Corporate and DFI Government Services, which were, of course, Barry's other, successful creations. And I see a few faces from that era, even though all of us have more wrinkles now than we did. And although it was a company that as Rachel mentioned, Barry started in the spare room of his home on Swan Street, and actually the early logo for DFI was a swan, which confused everybody because it was like, it stands for Defense Forecast, what's the swan? But, people who knew Barry knew what it was about. But honestly, I didn't really understand at 25 years old what it really took, frankly, to not just found a think tank, a very respected think tank here in Washington, D.C., but also to start a consulting firm that was really starting to get off the ground in the mid-'90s at that time. I really just didn't grasp sort of what that involved. So when I came back, I left the government in early 2000s to come back to work for Barry a second time, and I joined DFI on the government side of the house. That was really when I started to have an appreciation for what Barry and his senior leaders like Brett Lambert were really building. And that was a period of tremendous growth for DFI. I think when I started with DFI, we were about 45 or 50 people. I was there for about 3 years, and we were over 150 people, I think, by the time that I left. And that was a few years, I think about it was a few years, 2 or 3 years maybe, before Barry sold the firm. And when I think back, the vision, the work that went into that, the sheer just sort of hustle that went into growing the company from, frankly, a small business to really a mid-sized company that was very successful in a very short period of time, while continuing to make sure that it delivered every single day on the projects that its clients were paying for, is nothing short of impressive. I think particularly when you think about the fact that Barry really was a very serious national security scholar in his own right, and Ellen, gave beautiful examples of that intellectual curiosity over the years. And Barry never let go of that. And, this town is full of world-class scholars and subject matter experts, but only a few of them are successful entrepreneurs. I think it really takes a tremendous amount of confidence, and even if that's wrapped in a humble package, it takes a tremendous amount of confidence and a pretty high risk tolerance to go out and say, you know what, I'm going to put out a shingle, and even more, I'm going to hire some people, and bet that we're going to bring in the business to be able to keep these people employed. And that was a daily, monthly fight sometimes, during the time that I was with the company. As I thought about Barry, another hallmark that really stands out about him, and I think this is a theme for this whole gathering, is the way he was terrific at hiring and supporting terrific people. Whether he was bringing in young research assistants at Stimson, or entry-level people into the two parts of DFI, or hiring people more for leadership roles. As I think about the 30 years that I've spent in the national security community, I have, continuously bumped into people, alumni from the Stimson Center, from DFI, and that's just been a tremendous pleasure. Many of those alums are in the corporate world, some are still in government, some of them are in academia, but I really like to think that all of us carry inside us some of the excellence that Barry helped instill in us. And I would close by saying, alongside the profound contributions that he made to national security scholarship, particularly in the area of nuclear policy and arms control, his impressive entrepreneurial track record, the large community of professionals that he coached and mentored over the years. The other thing that really stands out to me when I think about Barry is his sense of fun. And I think he, at least from what I saw, continued to have that, all the way up until the end. I don't know if Stimson is still doing this, but back when I worked here in the summer, at least once or twice a week, we would have a softball team that would go out to the mall. We weren't very good, but it was still a lot of fun, and Barry was an avid participant in that. One time, at that time, he had, I think, sort of a second home in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That was lovely. He brought a bunch of us there for an offsite, where we were thinking about, we were sort of visioning for the projects that we were working on, but we also did a lot of team building and had a lot of fun. And while I'm not sure I ever saw the famous kind of beer cart that supposedly went around the halls in DFI after hours, although I was there after hours a lot, I definitely remember our epic holiday parties. And I will just say, Brett, when you know, you know. And that's probably all that should be said about that, especially these days. When I heard that Barry had passed away, I went online because, again, I was so surprised, and I came across a New York Times article about the increasing use of psychedelics for palliative care in which he was featured. And at one level, I was really surprised, like that. I mean, first of all, if you haven't read that article, I'd encourage you to, because it's just really gives you a window into Barry as a man who was expressing a lot of vulnerability that wasn't something I saw, certainly as a wee research assistant. But it just didn't, to me, align very much with the picture I had of him in mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, this makes perfect sense, because Barry was someone who was willing to think out of the box, as Ellen said. He was willing to kind of take new ideas, try new things, particularly if it was in the search of making progress on a problem. And I think that's very consistent with how he approached his professional life. As I said, I was here in September of last year, and that was the last time I saw Barry, and he was just bursting with pride about the Stimson Center. I hadn't been to this building. He took me on a tour of all of the offices. I got to meet Brian, who's incredibly impressive. And Barry was just so full of energy and in high spirits and cracking jokes in front of an audience just like this. And that is how I'm going to remember him. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to work for him, to have learned from him, and may his memory be a blessing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I know that Barry was so proud to welcome you back to the Stimson Center stage as we marked Stimson's 35th anniversary, and I'm personally very glad to have your remembrances here today. It's now my pleasure to share a video message from a dear friend, colleague, co-author, and beloved protege of Barry's, Taj Moore. Taj very much wanted to join us in person today, but has a special message to share with us via video.
Hi everyone, my name is Taj. I worked as a research assistant to Barry nearly 15 years ago. Barry was my first real boss, and he ultimately became a mentor and friend. If you're in the room today, you probably already know or have some inkling that Barry lived a remarkable life. And as someone who got to know him over the last couple of decades, I can confirm that that's right. I'm not sure where in the program this video gets played, but I'll just guess that at this point you have already heard about the many things Barry achieved in his professional life. From orchestrating the development and passage of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, to pioneering defense consulting, to co-founding the Stimson Center. The list goes on. And if it isn't obvious, any one of these achievements alone would be a career-defining capstone for any professional. Even more impressive to me, at least, is how he got there. In short, it was never supposed to be Barry Blechman who reached the heights that he climbed. He grew up in public housing in Kew Gardens, Queens. He didn't inherit money or a powerful name to get him started. His parents weren't academics. Instead, he used his intellect, imagination, and world-class hustle to create opportunities and ideas that moved all of us, especially those who think about defense and national security issues, forward. Barry was one of the biggest thinkers in the field, but he also did the impossible, made big things actually happen. That's tough. And he was able to do that not just because of his intellect, but because he was generous and collaborative. On the personal side, I knew Barry to be both fun-loving and forthright. What I have come to appreciate is that I could always count on him to give me helpful, honest feedback that critiqued without condescending, which is really hard to do. He also, through his actions, showed me how important it is to love and show up for the people in your life. Barry demonstrated that to me countless times with respect to his 3 daughters and partner, Kitty. I'm grateful for the time we worked together and even more appreciative of the years we had together as friends. So thank you, Barry, and thank you to everyone who joined in person or online to celebrate our friend. Take care.
Taj, I know you're tuning in, and we thank you for this wonderful message. I know Barry held your relationship in the deepest regard, and we're so pleased that you could share some reflections with us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce another dear friend to Barry, Ambassador Yael Lempert. Now at the Middle East Institute, Ambassador Lempert served for over 27 years as an American diplomat, including as the U.S. Ambassador to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan from 2023 to 2025. We're delighted that you could join us to share your memories of Barry. Welcome.
It's a tremendous honor to be with you all here today to remember the one and only Barry Blechman. We all know Barry was a brilliant scholar and policy advocate for nuclear security and a talented businessman and entrepreneur. But I want to speak today, like some others you've already heard, on behalf of all of those many, many, many people who he mentored and championed about what an incredible mentor and supporter he was of so many of those of us who crossed paths with him, and his profound kindness to an extent that, in my experience, really made him unique. Barry was the true embodiment of that most meaningful of titles, a mensch. I first met Barry when I was 22 years old, and I don't want anybody to do the math, but suffice it to say, it was several decades ago, and I had just gotten my master's, and I was a total arms control geek, dreaming of working at the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which by the time I graduated was in the process of getting shut down. So the job market was glutted with lots of folks with actual experience and expertise in arms control, and this newly minted, inexperienced graduate was struggling to get a job. Enter Barry. I actually sent my resume to DFI and Stimson at the recommendation of my professor at Georgetown, Jan Nolan, who said, why don't you just send it in to Barry Blechman? So I did. And I got called in for an interview where Barry and I nerded out about my graduate thesis, which was on the congressional-executive relationship through the lens of START treaty ratification. And I got hired into a job where I was essentially his executive assistant, but in the grand Washington tradition, I was generously given the title senior advisor. So Barry was my first boss at my first real job, and he taught me so much, and he always gave me every possible opportunity. And he introduced me to some professional experiences I have never had since, like getting your birthday off as a day of leave of work, and of course, the epic and infamous DFI Christmas party. I was so proud that we wrote an article together. In reality, he wrote it. I made a few minor edits, and it was then published. But to my everlasting pride, the two of us were listed as co-authors. I can't even remember now what it was about. It was some esoteric arms control topic. But I remember how honored I felt to have my name linked to such a giant in print. And he, unlike so many other people, put my name on there. But Barry's generosity of spirit went far beyond the workplace. I left DFI after less than a year, joining the Foreign Service, a career move that I admit Barry was pretty skeptical about. He felt strongly that if I left DFI, I should pursue a career as a jazz singer, not a diplomat. But he warmed up to it, and he always met me for dinner whenever I visited Washington in between my overseas tours or when I was posted back here. And he delighted in my tales of life as a diplomat, and he gently offered advice and insights as I navigated various professional travails and opportunities. And always with his characteristic humor and wit and insight, he regaled me with stories of his work and encounters, of DFI's latest successes and challenges, of the Stimson Center's work, his efforts on nuclear security, but most importantly, and those recountings he relished the most, his eyes sparkling as he spoke, was when he told me about his family and updated me on all of his daughter's latest accomplishments. He was so proud of you all. And then our dinners grew, with Kitty and my husband joining whenever we met for some truly wonderful and memorable evenings. And one time, I think it was in 2004, I was just back from a stint working in Baghdad, and my family, who was worried about me and they wanted to get eyes on me, all decided to come to Washington to see me for the Passover holiday. My parents, 4 siblings, their kids, my uncle and aunt, and my cousins. And I happened to have dinner with Barry, and I consulted with him about what restaurants to take them to, being as he was quite a connoisseur, as my modest 1-bedroom apartment in Adams Morgan couldn't fit them all. Host them at my place, he insisted, as he would be out of town on vacation. And he turned over the keys to his gorgeous home and let my family invade for a very memorable Seder. Who turns their home over to a large group, including kids, to have a dinner in their absence? He was just that kind of guy, a total sweetheart, as everybody in this room knows. I could go on and on and on about Barry's many kindnesses and his being an incessant booster and supporter of me in so many ways. And as you all know, I am not alone. Barry's legacy reaches so deep and far across so many people, and some variant of my story and Taj's story and Christine's story could be told by so many people in this room and so many more around this city and country, all of those who Barry touched. And we all know the Truman quote about how if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. But Barry disproved Truman. He was a total antithesis of that. A true friend, supporter, cheerleader, and mentor to literally hundreds of people in this city and beyond. His imprint on all of us is part of his continuing legacy, just as Stimson is. May we all live up to his tremendous example. And like all of you, I miss him so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sharing your memories with us. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce another person who ultimately could not join us in person, but who sends a special message to us from Stanford, California. We are so pleased to welcome Barry's dear friend, former Stimson Board Director and 66th U.S. Secretary of State, the Honorable Condoleezza Rice.
I'm delighted to have this chance to join you in honoring my good friend and colleague, Barry Blechman. I first met Barry all the way back in 1981 when I was a young fellow here at Stanford and he came to visit. And Barry was then and remained someone that we all looked up to. We looked up to him for his intellect, we looked up to him for his commitment, and we looked up to him for what he was doing every day to make the world safer. It's totally fitting that these fellowships named for him on nuclear risk reduction would follow in that tradition, because I don't think there's anyone who did more as we were coming of age in the nuclear period with the Soviet Union, when we needed ideas about how to manage the risks of nuclear engagement, how we needed people who were willing to think broadly about that and boldly about it. And there was nobody like Barry Blechman in that regard. And so we miss him. I last saw him here in Palo Alto at a celebration of the Stimson Center. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am for his legacy, how grateful I am for his life, and how grateful I am that I was able to call him my friend.
We are so grateful to all of our speakers today for sharing their memories of Barry. I know there are many others in this room that have similar stories to share, but all of these stories bring and breathe lasting life into Barry's lasting impact, reminding us of how deeply he touched those around him. And Barry's impact lives on. As I noted at the outset, Barry joined us 2 weeks before he passed to moderate a final event at Stimson entitled A Future Without Nuclear Weapons. In it, Barry addressed a full crowd saying, "I'm glad to see so many people still care about nuclear weapons. I thought it was just Ward Wilson and me at this point." Barry's commitment to nuclear risk reduction was unmatched, but he was not alone in this commitment, and the work that Barry did here to champion peace and nuclear security inspired a new generation of thinkers on this issue. And I'm so pleased as we welcome several of them to the Stimson stage to join me as we explore Barry's legacy and new visions for nuclear risk reduction. So Brett Lambert worked alongside Barry for decades in the early days of DFI, holding several positions from 1989 until its sale in 2007. Among other key roles at the Densmore Group and Northrop Grumman, Brett was a Stimson Center board member, and I'm pleased to say he recently rejoined Stimson's board of directors. Russ Rumbaugh was a senior associate at Stimson and director of our budgeting and for foreign affairs and defense program, and my neighbor in the office. In the years since, Russ has held many esteemed roles, including as Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management and Comptroller. And Melanie Sisson is the former director of Stimson's Defense Strategy and Planning Program, who had the unenviable task of updating Barry's famous book, Force Without War. More about that soon. Melanie is currently Senior Fellow in the Foreign Policy Program Strobe Talbot Center for Security, Strategy, and Technology at Brookings. So Melanie, Russ, and Brett, it's a pleasure to welcome you all. I think my mic is transitioning. Yes, it is. Okay, I can walk away. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this discussion of Barry's legacy. So Barry and co-founder Michael Crapon both had a passionate and enduring commitment to reducing the risks of nuclear war. And that included formal nuclear arms control as well as proactive steps, pragmatic proactive steps, to bring rationality to the force mix in the U.S. nuclear arsenal, even if those were purely unilateral. Russ, you and Barry collaborated on an article in Foreign Affairs over a decade ago calling for the removal of all U.S. tactical nuclear weapons from Europe. And UN Barry noted that plans to use the approximately 180 B-61 gravity bombs that had been stored on bases in Belgium, Germany, and Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey, and capable of being delivered on U.S.-built F-15s or 16s, were impractical remnants of the Cold War. In reality, few people, and even at the time, few people believed that the weapons would have been able to stop a Soviet attack. And such weapons, you went on, had little military value during the Cold War and even less today. You called for them to be phased out. Looking back at that moment, Russ, what happened? Was there a missed opportunity to reset the strategic relationship with Russia, Europe, and the United States, at least with regards to nuclear weapons? Has that moment passed forever? Are we doomed to fail?
Well, I do think we've now heard enough of Barry, good things about Barry, that we can start talking about the other side. Rachel used the Stimson words, reducing risk, but Barry's personal goal was ridding the world of nuclear weapons. And he abandoned us before, while the world still has nuclear weapons. So at some point, he abandoned us a little bit too early. I think the most important, and I'm sorry, which emphasizes why the institutions he's built, the people he's built that will be such a long-lasting legacy are so important. But that moment was really pretty spectacular. The background of it is it wasn't Barry and I's idea. I was helping him run one of his famous panels where he had very senior people, and we had a just retired chief of staff of the Air Force who was really annoyed that he had to buy and build these bombs. He was just out of office and had spent a lot more time than he wanted and didn't think they were necessary. So we gave him a Hill engagement. We did an event on the Hill where he said, I don't want these. Why are we buying these? And you can imagine Barry's a little bit gleeful that he's got this senior 4-star general saying, Barry's been right for decades. But it was then that the missileers up at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana got caught cheating on their tests. And the general, while firmly convinced and having already said it publicly, did not feel he could continue to bash his beloved airmen, and so bowed out. Barry and I went on with the article, and it was I believe that was a really peak moment coming out of the commission. He and the secretary ran that, as he said in the video, the establishment said we might be able to do that. And that led to the Strategic Posture Commission, which really had this bipartisan, maybe we can do with fewer nukes, which in turn led to the Four Horsemen op-ed in 2007, and then President Obama's Prague agenda. You can find, that's one of his big peak moments of writing. You can find him in the op-ed saying like, yes, this is doable, we can do this. And I think that article is one of those key moments. Rachel's already signaled the F-35 dual-capable bomb went operational in March 2024. So again, Barry was around to see that we did not actually pull it off. But I think we'll return to that later.
The article came out just a few months after the Russian seizure of Crimea, and you acknowledge that neither conventional nor nuclear weapons would have stopped that. Others disagree. And today, some argue that a new class of tactical nuclear weapons might have deterred Russia's brutal escalation of the simmering war with Ukraine in February 2022, or may stop a future Russian invasion of Poland or the Baltic states. Barry, however, was unconvinced. In one of his last published articles, he challenged the need for new nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missiles with the great acronym of SLCM-ENS in Pentagonese. This has become a partisan issue. President Obama eliminated SLCM-ENS. Then President Trump brought them back. Then after President Biden tried to kill them again, nuclear enthusiasts in Congress forced him to reverse course, and the DoD dutifully, if reluctantly, made plans for their employment. You were in the Biden Pentagon at the time. What more can you tell us about this back and forth? Were you convinced of the need for SLCM-ENS, or were there a few busybodies in Congress mandating a weapon system that the military doesn't really need?
Well, it goes beyond Congress, and actually I don't think we've ever mentioned Barry literally wrote the book, Congress and National Security, right? So he knew Congress pretty well. But it goes beyond Congress. I think this tough to beat him chairing an event 2 weeks prior, but I believe this is one of his last published pieces, even after the psilocybin. He still was talking about nukes. And what I think it was important was to emphasize that we have not replaced that consensus we had, that Strategic Posture Commission of the 2000s. There was a consensus that progress could be made. That consensus has gone away, without a doubt. You heard both Barry and Michael say it on their video. There's been a turn of the times. What we experienced was this idea that a new consensus had already formed. And Barry's article helped puncture that. And certainly in the building you could find, like, wait a minute, this is not a full consensus that we need to do things, including Slickerman, and that's why you saw it in the Nuclear Posture Review. And certainly in the Navy, you could find folks who were like, obviously we will do what we are told, but it is not clear this goes. And it was just great to have Barry step into that public voice that he has done for so long and speak out for something he believed in and point out there wasn't a real consensus, and this is an issue with a lot of repercussions still up in the air.
Thanks, Russ. Melanie, you, Barry, and James Stevens published Military Coercion and U.S. Foreign Policy, the Use of Force Short of War, that the Stimson Center produced in 2020, that was drawing on cases from 1991 to 2018. And this built on one of the consistent themes of Barry's work throughout his lifetime, and at least going back to his days at Brookings in the early 1970s, the use of force short of war. For those who don't know, in 1978, Barry and Stephen S. Kaplan published Force Without War, U.S. Armed Forces as a Political Instrument, a collection that included contributions from David K. Hall, William B. Quant, Jerome Slater, Robert Slusser, and Philip Windsor. Can you explain why did you update this book from 1978? What were the key findings from that research, and what are some of the most important examples of the use of force short of war?
Sure. Well, thanks, Rachel, and thanks to the whole Stimson team for having us here to do this. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the panelists to say it's a real pleasure to be able to remember these experiences and Barry's accomplishments with you all. So I will answer as many of those as I can in as short a time as possible. There's a background story about how the legacy book to Force Without War came to be, and I have to give credit here to Russ and to James and to a gentleman named Scott Kendrick, who was a longtime Army colonel who came across the book and was just possessed of its wisdom, its findings, its insight, and thought it was, I mean, for him, I mean, he really is passionate about that book. and because, you know, it was his business. I mean, he was in the military, he was asked to do these things, and he was worried about national security and all of those things. And so, you know, they all literally conspired to get this project funded, and it took an awful long time and an awful lot of sort of stick-to-itiveness to make it happen. And so then I get to swoop in fashionably late to the party and have the experience of getting to work with Barry and James on it. Just briefly about the work itself. When I first talked to Barry about his interest in studying military coercion, he actually told me about his job with the Fuller Brush Company, and he described going door to door and, you know, talking to people about brooms and mops and I assume other, you know, brush-shaped objects. And he would say, he'd go through his whole spiel, and then at the end, with sort of a deft touch, he'd, you know, mention how much they cost. And he said the question that he usually got back at the times, you know, when he was having these exchanges, would be, well, for that much, does it work, right? And, you know, Barry, of course, told me this story purposefully, and I think it's very clear that that same pragmatic question really animated his interest. You know, we buy at great expense all of these instruments of military power, and we use them all the time, taking on the costs of their use and the risks of their use to try to, you know, persuade other actors to do what we want. And he just wanted to know, does it work? And if it does work, when? And under what conditions? And when does it not? How can we differentiate between those two and make wise choices? How can we understand this better? And so that was what I think he started with this line of research. There's lots of specific findings. The first book is a really thick volume. Ours is a little bit more pared down than that, so you can certainly find lots of details in those if you want. But I think there are three sort of key lessons that I take away from it. And first, and this is a very Barry kind of finding, is that we're not as smart as we think that we are. You know, we make so many assumptions about how our actions are perceived by other actors. And we're also very slow to recognize when conditions change and how that might affect, what it is that we're going to be able to achieve with these displays of military force. And so it is a subject that Barry and Stephen, initiated in such a meaningful way that has been carried on. It needs ongoing attention. So I want to flag that James, in fact, did another book looking at military coercion, not from the U.S. perspective, but from China's perspective. And so, ongoing legacy of this really important line of work that Barry is so well known for. Quickly, just two other general findings that I would highlight is that, the United States has used its military to coerce for a long time in a lot of different ways, but usually as part of these longer term conflicts of interests. So you can think about the US-Soviet competition and how frequently military coercion was used there, Saddam Hussein's bad behaviors, North Korean nuclearization, and so forth. And so we very infrequently did what you would call these sort of one-off brushback kinds of attempts. And that is important because in context, another Barry finding that I would highlight is to say, the record tells us that the other guy is just not likely to give up. When you're in these long-term serious conflicts of interest, they're going to come back around. So even if we can persuade them to behave better today, today is not tomorrow and tomorrow is not forever. And we need to be prepared that they will come back around and, as they say, try again. So wholesale, I think what that means is that we should be very skeptical about claims that get made that, these very sharp coercive uses of power, like, for example, bombing Iranian nuclear infrastructure.
I was wondering what you're
just as an example. We have to be skeptical when claims are made that this will produce, will resolve long-term political problems, will achieve our long-term political goals, and especially when those goals are especially demanding.
So I think you made a good point. When people hear the word coercion, there's often a negative connotation relating to getting someone to do something that they really don't want to do and it's against their will. And some might even object that the United States doesn't do coercion. We're the good guys. Bad actors coerce innocent, vulnerable people. The United States, by contrast, deters bad actors, and we don't coerce people. And a lot has happened in the intervening 5 years since you all have written this book, and I might argue that there are even more obviously coercive things that the U.S. government has attempted or is attempting as we speak. Everything from threats to cut off access to U.S. markets or impose draconian tariffs or even to seize territory. So how do we respond to this? What, if anything, have U.S. officials learned about their ability to coerce others to achieve results through measures short of war? Should we be sending Trump administration a copy of your book? We probably still have a few copies lying around here for those.
In what language?
Yeah.
Well, so the short answer is, of course, yes, we should send the book over because, it can't hurt, right? And also, I should note that for those interested in buying the book, all of it's to the benefit of the Stimson Center, which is the beneficiary of all royalties, should we ever sell enough books that it actually returns some royalties, but they will all continue to support the Stimson Center. So look, I think there are officials in the Pentagon, in the State Department, and other of our national security agencies that I think have become interested in coercion broadly, not just the military instrument, but certainly how, as you mentioned, it interacts with other tools that we have to use. And so what I try to think about is I try to have what we might call strategic empathy for the doers in the government when it comes to military coercion. So we can sort of help try to provide information and help provide knowledge, and we hope people take it up. But even when they do, it's really hard to do. Policymakers, to do military coercion effectively, they have to understand their adversary pretty well. They have to know what motivates the other actor. They have to know what the incentive structures surrounding that other actor are. And they have to do assessments of squishy things like probability and risks and costs and benefits, and that's really difficult. And then on top of that, the other things that they have to do are they have to coordinate across officials, they have to coordinate across agencies to be consistent in their messaging about what they're asking that actor to do, on what time frame, and what the consequences will be if they don't. And that's takes time and effort and energy, and all of that is in short supply in our diffuse and often very fractious system of governance. So we have to have sympathy for that. And what I guess I'm saying is we can and should continue Barry's legacy of trying to inform policymakers about what can be known, about what's likely to succeed and what isn't. And then we also need to think about how we can organize and structure ourselves to make it easier for them to do these things in implementation.
Thanks. We spent a lot of time talking about Barry's sort of substantive vision, but he also had this entrepreneurial vision that I think was really inspiring to many of us and always urging us to stretch those muscles, which are not, natural to foreign policy nerds. They're just not. So I want to turn to you, Brett, because I think Barry's amazing focus and vision on the strategic and the substantive issues has been made very clear. But he also had this vision and focus on practical policy that translates to business. So can you talk a little bit about why, in 1989, did Barry decide it'd be a great idea to not just start a consulting company, but also a think tank? How did he traverse those lines between business and policy?
I don't see them as traversing. I mean, I think if you look at Barry, the man, I mean, he obviously is passionate about arms control, right? That's demonstrated, and he really believed that. And I think he was also passionate at the very beginning, at least when I first knew him, about mentoring. So those kind of went hand in hand. And there was a middle part where we started DFI, and he was a very practical man in that he wanted his legacy to live on, right? So that was through Stimson and through the vision of a world without nuclear weapons. But he also was practical enough that he needed to finance the vision. And he was an entrepreneur in his own right, and we started DFI, and that's why we worked together with Stimson for so long. And then that whole mentoring thing that he had started out with carried through both of those visions. So I see it more as a continuation. He fought really hard up until the end on his passion, but he never let go of how that, the business part is important to that passion, and how he could get other people to carry on the legacy.
There's a great story of your former colleague Steve Irwin and you staying up all night to come up with an answer to a very hard problem using a methodology that Barry had suggested. And you both concluded that Barry's approach isn't going to work.
Yeah, he was wrong.
Yeah. You can say that.
Yeah.
I still can say that. You tried something else, and then you had to present the findings to Barry. So Barry asked some thoughtful questions, and he probed your logic, and he quickly supported your approach. And Steve wrote, Barry was most interested in what worked, not who came up with the idea. Can you tell us more about that night and sort of what it embodied in terms of...
Oh, yeah. Well, what I remember of it, other than a lot of coffee, we had a big project to determine how many of what back then were called big LEOs and little LEOs. So this was the beginning of the space age. We were contracted by a bank to decide whether Odyssey or Iridium or one of the 23 other small orbit, low Earth orbit satellites systems proposed were going to survive, or whether 8 of the GEO systems were going to survive, and it's where we learned about latency. And anyway, we learned a lot in this project. And Barry just wanted us to enter them into a spreadsheet and come up with, calculate the bandwidth that's required and calculate. So we did that, and we did that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And our presentation was that morning, and so Steve and I were trying to get the numbers to settle, and they just wouldn't settle. And I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We took all the FCC filings we had from all these people, and we realized that every one of them said that they needed only 30% market share to achieve break even, but there were 20 of them. And so we realized that wasn't going to work. So we started working backwards from that and figured out who had the most capital, who had the bigger backing from banks, and who had the more political capital to actually get FCC licenses, FAA licenses to launch these things. So we just changed the entire model. And we were nervous as hell at 7 when Barry showed up, and we had already eaten all the donuts we got for him. And and he let us walk through it, and I was less nervous than Steve because I think I was asleep at the time. And finally he just said, yeah, you guys are right. And we went and pitched it to the client. The client stayed with us for over 2 years. after that because they hadn't thought of it. And that's what we brought to it. It's just a new perspective.
I mentioned at the beginning that Barry followed the maxim that one could accomplish anything in Washington if you were willing to let others take the credit.
Yes.
Can you talk about that in terms of his legacy on mentoring? You started talking about mentoring. Sort of that was sort of how Barry ran the Stimson Center, ran DFI, and certainly as an emeritus member of this team.
We didn't call it mentoring back then. We called it throwing you into the lion's den. So you briefed your studies. You know, in most places in D.C., it's the guy who's seen him in the last, particularly in the Pentagon, whoever has seen him in the last, 15 minutes is the guy who's briefing, or their boss who's been well briefed. Barry would make you brief your own briefings to CEOs of Lockheed, CEOs of Northrop. And he would be there to support you, but you did your own briefing. You owned your work. And that gave you a tremendous amount of fear, but also a tremendous amount of confidence. And you were ready to beat the next one. And you learned, more so than just sitting back and absorbing it. When Barry mentored you, and I think everyone in the room that he's done this with, you weren't a mentor, you were a participant. You were there. I mean, he actively engaged you. And he really wanted to know what you thought, which is odd these days.
So I want to end with some words from Barry. He really cared deeply about this country and the security of this country, and was troubled by how poor or inadequate analysis led policymakers to make bad decisions, especially pertaining to matters of war and peace. So in 2013, he wrote, "The United States has been at war in the greater Middle East more or less continuously since the early 1980s. In the current century, the United States fought in Afghanistan and invaded Iraq and put down an insurgency there. Reasonable people can disagree about the wisdom of U.S. actions in each of these situations, but they were all wars of choice, not necessity. Too often, decisions to intervene militarily were founded on incomplete or erroneous information, the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq being a case in point. Each of the U.S. military interventions in the Middle East has evolved in unexpected ways." Are we capable of intervening in places with the level of understanding of complex situations that Barry noted was necessary in order to achieve success? Have we learned? Has Barry Blechman taught us anything in the last 40 years? Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes or errors of the past, sustained by inertia or unwillingness to buck conventional wisdom? Russ, you look like you're...
Do we actually have to answer that question? It's a big question, Rachel.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. I guess I would say, so, were we going down the same?
Sure.
I think Barry's favorite compliment to himself was he was the right's favorite lefty.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? One of his, Condoleezza Rice is sending a video message. He served on one of Donald Rumsfeld's commissions that came out with an answer that the left did not like. And Barry, it continued to be a controversial thing, but Barry was like, the bureaucracy could not make their point. They were wrong. So, yes, the world is, as Barry and Michael said, the world is not quite as hopeful as it was a decade ago. We still have to get through it, but Barry made a huge difference. I think that's evident. I hate to point out, we are not the next generation, right? There's a whole other generation down below us that Barry touched, built in that sense of scholarship, that sense of purpose, that sense of skepticism, that just because the bureaucracy said something didn't mean it, that you could walk in and engage with that. So has history learned Barry's lessons yet? I don't know, but a lot of people have learned Barry's lessons, and I really think you will continue to see that and people to continue to evoke both his work and his personal development of them, of why they are plunging into the breach yet again.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I'm not prone to optimism as sort of my natural state of being. But in this case, I actually take Barry's example and the things that were so important to him as my source of optimism, because despite having seen as much history as Barry saw and lived through as many battles as he lived through in this town about things that he cared so profoundly about, you know, what I think we all, in some way, shape, or form, have said that we take away from him is that Barry fundamentally believed, his theory of change, if you will, in the parlance of the town, is that if you do good work and speak up, then you can make change. Then you can do good things, right? And so that's when I need a little infusion of optimism. I sort of think if Barry Blechman, up until, you know, just so very recently, did good work and spoke up, well, then I sure as hell should be able to, right? And so should a lot of the rest of us. Right.
I think he got us this far. And I think he created Stimson to get our kids this far. So, yeah, I have hope.
Well, I have hope. And as you know, we all, I think, can take Barry's commitments forward with us, not just in the next decade or the next 3 decades, but I think his legacy is certainly one that will last a very, very, very long time. So thank you, Melanie, Russ, and Brett, for joining me, not only to explore the future of nuclear risk reduction, but really what we can take from Barry's lifelong commitment. And as anyone who knew Barry would tell you, he was always prepared, and he would always, always help out. Even now, even today, Barry has committed to help us continue the fight to reduce nuclear threats in bold new ways. And Barry always knew this wasn't going to be easy, but to achieve this future, Barry Blechman had a plan. And to introduce the latest phase of this plan, it is my pleasure to welcome our last speaker for the evening, or for the day, to the stage, Dr. Jennifer Blechman, Barry's eldest daughter, to share some words and some news.
Wow. I gotta say, speaking for my dad is a huge honor, but standing behind the Stimson podium is a little overwhelming, and sharing the stage. So I want to thank you all so much for including us in this event and this beautiful and truly moving tribute to our dad. It's really impressive to see the magnitude of his work, which we've tried to understand over many decades, but you've helped, so thank you. And particularly the visions that Brett, Russ, Melanie have helped put forward gives me some hope, which is needed. As you all know, Barry spent much of his life committed to nuclear security and had a long-standing and deep commitment to Stimson. I'm thrilled and so proud to share that Barry created a fund that will award grants for 10 consecutive years intended to continue his work to reduce the risk and dangers posed by nuclear weapons and also civil uses of nuclear energy. So this is to be done in Stimson's tradition of seeking practical steps to reduce specific risks. So further details will be coming, but the grants will fund yearly visiting fellows, and Barry's vision is that the competitive projects could include things such as convening work groups of stakeholders, which would tackle problems from the executive or legislative branches or relevant industries. I know it's hard to imagine problems coming from the executive or legislative. Projects that may intend to produce books or other forms of expression focusing on specific relevant issues, or projects to work with members of Congress, industry, government, or the public to educate about such specific issues that you've heard spoken about today and know much more. So details will be announced over the coming year, and you'll hear more from people who will know far more about executing this than I do. But please know that how impressed we are with all of you, the amazing and important work you do to help carry on Barry's vision of making the world a safer place. We are truly grateful for all of you.
Jenny, on behalf of the Stimson Center and Brian Finley, we are absolutely honored to be granted this unique opportunity to honor Barry's lifetime commitment to nuclear risk reduction. It is our honor, it is our privilege to take this work forward, and we pledge to do Barry and the entire Blechman family proud in this endeavor as we take forward nuclear security, the issue upon which the Stimson Center was founded in Barry's honor and memory. For those of you who are interested and inspired to join in, your contribution will be a meaningful part of Barry's legacy. For those in the room, your program, can you hold up a program? Your program has a I left mine on the has a QR code on the back that you can scan to add your support to this effort. Our virtual attendees can use the link that's just been placed in your chat to take part, and we are grateful for your support as we join together with the Blechman family to champion Barry's lifelong pursuit of peace and stability. With that, and with enormous gratitude, I close today's event with you all. Barry was a man of action, and his stubborn, undaunted commitment lives on today and into the future with the love and support and dedication of people like you in this room and watching at home. On behalf of Brian Finley and the entire Stimson Center, thank you for joining us today to mark the life of the irrepressible Barry Blechman. Thank you.